Listen up, because I'm only going to say this once and I ain't going to sugarcoat it for nobody. You clicked on this video, which means somewhere deep down, you know something ain't right. You feel it in your bones. We're living through some unprecedented stuff right here, right now. And if you ain't paying attention, you're going to wake up one day wondering what the hell happened to this country. So buckle up, because we're about to talk about something that should shake every single American to their core. But somehow, half the country is walking around like it's just another Tuesday. We got ourselves a convicted felon sitting in the Oval Office. Not accused, not alleged, convicted. 34 felonies. Let that sink in for a minute. 34. That's not a typo. That's not fake news. That's a jury, 12 everyday Americans who looked at the evidence, listened to the testimony, and said guilty on every single count. Every single one. And yet here we are acting like this is normal, like this is just politics as usual. Well, it ain't usual, and it sure as hell ain't normal. Now, I know what some of y'all are thinking. You're thinking, Sam, why are you getting all worked up about this? The man won the election. The people spoke. And yeah, you're right. The people did speak. And that's the scariest part of this whole damn thing. Because what it tells me is that somewhere along the line, we stopped caring about truth. We stopped caring about accountability. We stopped caring about whether the person leading this nation is someone who respects the law or someone who thinks they're above it. And before you come at me with that witch hunt nonsense, let me stop you right there. A witch hunt is when there's no evidence, when there's no crime, when it's all made up to take somebody down. But that ain't what happened here. What happened here is that a man broke the law, tried to cover it up, got caught, got tried by a jury of his peers, and got convicted. That's not a witch hunt. That's called justice. Or at least it's supposed to be. Let me take you back, because some of y'all might have forgotten how we got here. 2016, right before the election, Donald Trump is running for president, and he's got a problem named Stormy Daniels. Now, I ain't here to judge nobody's personal life. What you do behind closed doors is your business. But when you start paying people $130,000 to keep quiet about it, when you start falsifying business records to hide where that money came from, when you start lying to the American people about what you did, that's when it becomes everybody's business. That's when it becomes a crime. And that's exactly what Trump did. He paid Stormy Daniels to shut up. He had his lawyer, Michael Cohen, handle the transaction. And then when it came time to pay Cohen back, Trump and his organization recorded those payments as legal expenses. Legal expenses for hush money. That's falsifying business records. And under New York law, that's a felony. Not a misdemeanor, a felony. And he did it 34 times. 34 separate instances of lying on paper to cover up what he did. Now the prosecution laid all this out in court. They brought receipts. Literally, they showed the checks. They showed the invoices. They showed the ledgers. And they brought witnesses, including Michael Cohen himself, who sat on that stand and said, yeah, I did this, and I did it because Trump told me to. Was Cohen a perfect witness? Hell no. The man's a convicted liar. But here's the thing. They didn't just have Cohen. They had documents. They had communications. They had a paper trail that backed up everything Cohen said. And the jury, 12 regular folks who didn't know Trump, didn't have any agenda. They looked at all of it and said, we believe the prosecution. Guilty on all 34 counts. That was back in May of 2024. First time in American history a former president got convicted of crimes. First time. And what did Trump do? Did he accept responsibility? Did he show any remorse? Did he say, you know what, I messed up? Nah, he doubled down. He called it rigged. He called it a witch hunt. He attacked the judge. He attacked the prosecutors. He attacked the jury system itself. And then he did something that should have been impossible. He ran for president anyway, and he won. Now, let's talk about that for a second, because that's the part that really gets me. We're talking about a man who was found guilty of 34 felonies, and the American people looked at that and said, yeah, we're cool with that. We're going to make him the most powerful person on the planet. What does that say about us? What does that say about where we are as a country? Because I'll tell you what it says to me. It says that for a whole lot of folks, the team matters more than the truth. The party matters more than the law. Winning matters more than what's right. And that's dangerous. That's how democracies die. Not with a bang, but with a shrug. With people saying, yeah, I know he's a criminal, but I like his policies. Yeah, I know he broke the law, but the other side is worse. That's how you normalize corruption. That's how you normalize lawlessness. That's how you end up with a system where the rich and powerful play by different rules than everybody else. After the conviction, Trump's legal team did what they always do. They filed appeals, they filed motions, they tried every trick in the book to delay the sentencing, and it worked for a while. Months went by, the election happened, Trump won, and his lawyers kept arguing that you can't sentence a president-elect, that it would be unprecedented, that it would interfere with the transition of power, and they took it all the way to the Supreme Court, emergency request to block the sentencing. And you know what the Supreme Court said? 5-4. They said no. Let the sentencing happen. Now that 5 included Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Barrett, both conservatives, joining the 3 liberal justices. Even they weren't willing to go along with blocking this. The 4 dissenters, Thomas, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, they wanted to stop it, but they didn't have the votes. So on January 9th, 2025, just days before Trump was set to take the oath of office, the sentencing went forward. Judge Juan Merchan, the judge who presided over the trial, he was in an impossible position. On one hand, you got a man convicted of 34 felonies. Under normal circumstances, that man is looking at prison time or at least probation, fines, something. On the other hand, this man is about to become president of the United States. You can't exactly throw the president in jail. You can't put him on probation. The logistics alone would be a constitutional nightmare. So what did Merchan do? He imposed what's called an unconditional discharge. No jail time, no fines, no probation. But, and this is the important part, the conviction stands. Trump is officially a convicted felon. That's on his record forever. That's in the history books. Donald J. Trump, 47th President of the United States, convicted of 34 felonies. First president ever to hold office with a criminal record. That's his legacy now, whether he likes it or not. Now, Trump and his supporters, they're spinning this like it's a victory. They're saying, see, no jail time, total exoneration, witch hunt confirmed. But that ain't what happened. An unconditional discharge ain't an exoneration. It ain't a pardon. It's a sentencing option that judges use when they think the conviction itself is punishment enough, or when the circumstances make actual punishment impractical. In this case, it's the latter. Merchan couldn't realistically punish a sitting president, but he made damn sure that conviction stuck. And that matters, because no matter what Trump says, no matter how many rallies he holds, no matter how many times he calls it fake, that jury verdict is real. Those 34 felony convictions are real, and they ain't going anywhere. But here's where it gets really frustrating, because while the conviction stands, Trump faces no real consequences, none. He's not in jail. He's not paying fines. He's not on probation. He's in the White House with all the power and prestige that comes with it, acting like nothing ever happened. And that sends a message, a dangerous message. It says that if you're rich enough, if you're powerful enough, if you can get enough people to vote for you, the law doesn't really apply to you. You can break it, you can get caught, you can get convicted, and you can still walk away. Compare that to what happens to regular folks. You think some working class person convicted of 34 felonies is getting an unconditional discharge? Hell no, they're going to prison. They're losing their job. They're losing their rights. They're being branded a felon for the rest of their lives in a way that actually affects them. But Trump gets to be president. That's two-tiered justice, plain and simple. One set of rules for the powerful, another set for everybody else. And don't even get me started on the hypocrisy. The law and order crowd, the party that's supposed to be tough on crime, they're defending a convicted felon. They're making excuses for him. They're attacking the justice system that convicted him. Where's the law and order now? Where's the respect for juries? Where's the belief that if you break the law, you face the consequences? It's gone. It evaporated the moment their guy got caught. And that tells you everything you need to know about whether they actually believe in the principles they claim to stand for, or whether it's all just tribal politics, us versus them. My team versus your team. Truth doesn't matter. Justice doesn't matter. Only winning matters. Now Trump says he's going to keep appealing. He's going to fight this forever. And yeah, the appeals process will drag on for years. His lawyers will argue that evidence was admitted improperly. They'll argue that the jury instructions were wrong. They'll argue that presidential immunity should have protected him. And maybe one of those arguments will work. Maybe an appeals court will overturn the conviction, but I wouldn't bet on it. The evidence was strong. The trial was fair. The jury was unanimous. Most legal experts think the conviction's going to stand, but even if it doesn't, even if Trump somehow gets it overturned years from now, the damage is done. The historical record is written. He was convicted. He served as president while convicted, and nothing can change that. Let's talk about what this means for the country, because this ain't just about Trump. This is about the precedent we're setting. This is about what we're willing to accept. The framers of the Constitution, they set up a system based on the idea that no one is above the law, not the president, not Congress, not the courts, nobody. The law applies equally to everyone. That's the foundation of democracy. That's what separates us from dictatorships and monarchies. But what happens when we elect someone who's been convicted of crimes? What happens when we shrug our shoulders and say, it's fine. I like his policies. We're undermining that foundation. We're saying that the law is negotiable, that accountability is optional, that as long as you're popular enough, you can get away with anything. And once you start down that road, it's real hard to turn back. Think about the message this sends to future politicians. If Trump can get convicted of 34 felonies and still become president, why would anyone else worry about breaking the law? If there are no real consequences for the powerful, why follow the rules? You start to create a system where corruption is baked in, where the assumption is that leaders will lie and cheat and break the law, and we'll just accept it because that's how the game is played. That ain't the America I grew up believing in. That ain't the country I want to leave to the next generation. But that's where we're headed if we don't wake up and demand better. Now, I know some of y'all are going to say, Sam, you're being too dramatic. It's just one case. It's just hush money. It's not like he killed somebody. And yeah, you're right. There are worse crimes, but this ain't about the severity of the crime. This is about the principle. This is about whether we believe in the rule of law or we don't. Because if we're going to say that hush money and falsifying records doesn't matter, then where do we draw the line? What crime is serious enough that we actually hold a president accountable? What happens when the next one does something worse and points to Trump and says, well, he got away with it. Why can't I? You see how this works? You let one thing slide, and pretty soon everything slides. And let's not forget, the hush money case was the least serious of the criminal cases Trump was facing. There was the classified documents case, where he allegedly took boxes of top secret files to his resort and refused to give them back. There was the January 6th case, where he was accused of trying to overturn the election and inciting the Capitol riot. Those cases were way more serious, but they didn't make it to trial before the election. The classified documents case got dismissed by a Trump-appointed judge on shaky legal grounds. The January 6th case got derailed by appeals and delays. Only the New York case moved fast enough to get a conviction. So the one case that stuck, the one case where Trump actually faced a jury and got convicted, was the least serious of the bunch. Think about that. If he'd been held accountable for the bigger stuff, we might be having a very different conversation right now, but he wasn't. And now he's president. And the other cases, they're effectively dead. You can't prosecute a sitting president. So Trump skated on the serious charges and got convicted on the lesser one. And even that conviction didn't stop him. The fact that voters elected him anyway, knowing he was a convicted felon, that's what keeps me up at night. Because it means that a significant chunk of the American people either don't care about criminal convictions, or they've been convinced that the whole justice system is corrupt and can't be trusted. And I get it. I understand why people are cynical. I understand why people think the system is rigged. Because in a lot of ways it is. Rich people do get better lawyers. Powerful people do get special treatment. But the answer to that ain't to elect someone who embodies that corruption. The answer is to demand a system that actually works for everyone. The answer is to hold everyone accountable, not to give a pass to the people we like. There's a poll that shows 58% of Americans believe the justice system is rigged in favor of the rich and powerful. 58%. That's more than half the country. And you know what? They're right. The Trump case proves it. Here's a man convicted of 34 felonies, and he walks away with no punishment because he got elected president. If that ain't proof that the system treats powerful people differently, I don't know what is. But the solution ain't to burn the system down. The solution is to fix it, to demand real accountability, to vote for people who actually respect the law, to stop making excuses for criminals just because they're on our team. Judge Mershon could have thrown the book at Trump. He could have sentenced him to prison, knowing full well it wouldn't be enforced while Trump is president. He could have made a statement, but he didn't. He chose the unconditional discharge, and I think I understand why. He was trying to avoid a constitutional crisis. He was trying to navigate an impossible situation. But in doing so, he let Trump off the hook. And that's going to haunt us, because now every future president knows that if they can just delay their trial long enough, if they can just win an election, they can avoid consequences. That's a terrible precedent. That's not how justice is supposed to work. The appeals Trump is filing, they're not really about overturning the conviction. They're about keeping the issue alive. They're about giving him something to campaign on. They're about letting him play the victim. Every time he goes to court, every time he files a motion, he gets to stand in front of cameras and say, look how persecuted I am. Look how the deep state is coming after me. And his supporters eat it up. They don't care about the facts. They don't care about the evidence. They care about the narrative. And the narrative is that Trump is a fighter, that he's standing up to the corrupt establishment, that he's being targeted because he threatens the status quo. Never mind that he was actually convicted by a jury. Never mind that the evidence was overwhelming. The narrative is what matters. And as long as that narrative works, as long as people believe it, Trump can keep doing whatever he wants. The Supreme Court's decision to let the sentencing proceed was significant, but it wasn't enough. Yeah, Roberts and Barrett showed some independence by not blocking it, but 4 justices were willing to intervene to protect Trump. 4 justices thought that a convicted felon shouldn't have to face sentencing just because he got elected. That's scary. That's the Supreme Court saying that political power can override the normal legal process. And if that becomes the norm, we're in serious trouble, because then the law really doesn't matter. Then it's just about who has the most power and the best lawyers. Let me bring this home. We're at a crossroads. We can accept what's happening and normalize it, or we can stand up and say this ain't right. We can demand better. We can hold our leaders accountable. We can refuse to let political tribalism override basic principles of justice and truth. Because if we don't, if we just shrug and move on, we're telling every future politician that crime doesn't matter, that lying doesn't matter, that the law is just a suggestion. And once we cross that line, there's no going back. Democracy requires certain things to survive. It requires an informed electorate. It requires a free press. It requires an independent judiciary, and it requires accountability. Without accountability, you don't have democracy. You have something else, something darker, and we're dangerously close to that line right now. Donald Trump is a convicted felon serving as president of the United States. That is a fact. That is history. And that is a stain on this country that we're all going to have to live with. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to accept it, or are we going to fight back? Are we going to demand that the next generation of leaders respects the law, or are we going to keep electing people who think they're above it? The choice is ours, and we better make it quick because time is running out. The precedent is being set right now. The future is being written right now. And if we don't speak up, if we don't stand up, we're going to wake up one day in a country we don't recognize, a country where the powerful face no consequences, a country where truth is whatever the loudest voice says it is, a country where justice is a joke. I don't want to live in that country. And I don't think you do either. So pay attention, stay informed, hold people accountable. And for the love of everything that's holy, vote like your democracy depends on it, because it does. We got a convicted felon in the White House. Let's make damn sure it's the last time that ever happens. That's all I got to say. Now you know. Now you can't say you didn't know. What you do with that information, that's on you.